November 22nd, 1963. The world is stunned by a shocking crime.
President Kennedy has been assassinated. It's official now. The president is dead.
The government concluded that President John F. Kennedy was killed by a single assassin acting alone. But most Americans have never believed it. Tonight, a look at the forensic evidence to search for answers to a 40-year-old mystery. Could one bullet go through both the president and the governor of Texas? Was there another assassin firing at the president from the so-called grassy knoll? And we'll conduct a new, state-of-the-art forensic analysis of this crude recording of a police radio transmission. Does it hold the secrets of a conspiracy to kill the President of the United States? Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963. For President John F. Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline, the day began as many political visits do, with crowds of well-wishers and dignitaries meeting them at the airport. The president was running late, but he took a few moments to shake hands. At 10 minutes before noon, the presidential motorcade began its 11-mile journey through downtown Dallas. Joining the Kennedys in the limousine were Texas Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie. There were a few protesters, but most bystanders gave the president an enthusiastic welcome. Gail Newman and her husband Bill were waiting in Dealey Plaza with their two young boys as the motorcade approached.
I had never seen a president in person, and I was quite anxious to see both he and Mrs. Kennedy because they were so popular.
Farther down the street, a Dallas businessman, Abraham Zapruder, was shooting what was to become the most famous home movie in history.
I remember seeing the president's car coming towards us, and the first two shots rang out, and it was a bang, bang, about like that.
Gunfire hit the president in the back. Governor Connally was also wounded, and then a fatal wound to the president's head.
The limousine is now traveling at a very high rate of speed. Secret Service men standing up in the limousine. They are armed with submachine guns. It appears as though someone in the limousine might have been hit by the gunfire.
Doctors were able to save Governor Connally, but there was little they could do for the mortally wounded president.
President Kennedy has been assassinated. It's official now. The president is dead.
As news of the assassination spread, the Dallas police frantically searched for suspects. A witness saw a rifle in the sixth-floor window of a warehouse, the Texas School Book Depository, behind the presidential motorcade. A few hours later, an employee of the depository, Lee Harvey Oswald, was arrested for allegedly killing a Dallas police officer, J.D. Tippit, who had stopped Oswald for questioning. Oswald was later charged with killing the president. He claimed he was innocent, but his background was troubling. He was a former Marine who had defected to Russia and embraced communism, but later returned to the United States.
He had handed out pro-Castro leaflets in New Orleans. He looked like an instrument of the Soviet Union.
But Oswald never got the chance to tell his story. 2 days after the assassination, on live television, a man stepped from the shadows and shot Lee Harvey Oswald as he was being escorted through police headquarters. Oswald's killer, Jack Ruby, owned a Dallas strip club.
Jack Ruby had a halo around him, and the halo said organized crime. He was raised in Chicago, associated with organized crime figures there, including Capone. He came to Dallas and was part of the underworld of Dallas.
Oswald's murder fueled speculation that there had to be a larger conspiracy to kill the president and that Ruby had killed Oswald to silence him. Ruby died a few years later in prison. He always denied there was a conspiracy, but that hasn't stopped the speculation.
It was too awful to imagine that a president could be removed from office without something more weighty than Lee Harvey Oswald sitting in the Texas Book Depository. I mean, on the face of it, that's just unacceptable, isn't it?
Nevertheless, the forensic evidence against Oswald seemed overwhelming. A Mannlicher Carcano rifle found on the 6th floor of the school book depository had Oswald's palm print visible when it was disassembled. A backyard photograph showed Oswald holding the rifle. Forensic analysis identified Oswald's handwriting on the postal money order to Klein's Sporting Goods, the store that sold the weapon. Cotton fibers from the shirt Oswald was wearing when arrested were the same as those found in between the rifle stock and the metal butt plate of the rifle. On the morning of the assassination, Oswald walked into the school book depository carrying a paper pouch he said it contained curtain rods. Paper fibers from that pouch linked the gun to a blanket in Oswald's garage. Oswald's prints were on the cardboard boxes that surrounded the so-called sniper's nest in the school book depository. The forensic evidence made a strong case linking Oswald to the alleged murder weapon. The president's autopsy should have provided more answers, but the way it was handled has raised controversy and suspicion.
The persons involved in doing the autopsy had no training to do a medical legal autopsy, and the doctors here had no training in gunshot wounds.
Two Navy pathologists, Dr. James Humes and Dr. J. Thornton Boswell, performed the autopsy, and by all accounts, made numerous mistakes. They didn't examine the president's clothing to locate the bullet holes. The path of the bullet wound in Kennedy's back wasn't fully examined.
By the way, do you know, they never even knew on the night of the autopsy that there was a bullet hole in the front of the president's neck. As far as they were concerned, they were seeing a tracheostomy.
And the most critical of all, they didn't describe the head wound properly.
Dr. Humes didn't know how to describe bullet injuries, so at one point he says the fractures of the skull caused by the second bullet are too complex to permit verbal description, and I will rely upon the photographs and x-rays. The photographs didn't come out.
I don't think that they were part of some massive conspiracy. They were inept, forensically incompetent, totally inexperienced. They botched the job completely. They missed it.
The results of the autopsy were disclosed by a blue ribbon panel appointed by President Johnson and chaired by the Chief Justice of the United States, Earl Warren. Its investigation concluded it was an open and shut case.
The commission reports that the fatal shots that entered President Kennedy's head and throat were fired by Lee Harvey Oswald from the Texas School Book Depository, acting solely by himself, and that there was no conspiracy, either foreign or domestic.
Almost immediately, the Warren report was ridiculed because of inaccuracies, both real and perceived.
The sketch that was published as part of the Warren Commission of the position of President Kennedy's head and the placement of where the bullet entered are not correct.
But the president was dead and the governor wounded. Were all these injuries caused by a single shooter? When we return, the forensics of what has been called the magic bullet theory and the search for answers. As Americans mourned the loss of their charismatic young president, many found it hard to believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. A government commission concluded Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots from the 6th-floor window of the Texas School Book Depository, which was behind the presidential motorcade as it passed by. 1 shot missed. Another struck both President Kennedy and Governor Connally. And the third caused the fatal wound. For 40 years, there's been an ongoing debate as to whether one bullet could have passed through both the president and the governor.
Now, the single bullet theory is total nonsense.
Dr. Cyril Wecht is a forensic pathologist who has never accepted the single bullet theory.
It's an incredible bit of convenient fiction designed to put the case to rest, to allay the anxiety of this country, indeed of the world, and to have done with it.
Dr. Wecht doesn't believe that the president and governor were in the right position for one bullet to go through both men. This demonstration shows why.
One bullet entered John Kennedy in the back, coursed through his neck, goes out, it stops in midair, it comes back about 18 to 20 inches, hits John Connally behind the right armpit, pierces the right lung, breaks the right 5th rib, exits from a point below the nipple, swings up and around, hits John Connally in the back of the right wrist, shatters the distal end of the radius, exits from the front of his right wrist, and goes into his left thigh, strikes the femur, and then falls somehow onto a stretcher, only to be fortuitously found by the maintenance man at Parkland Hospital. Lo and behold, there was this bullet.
Because the bullet seemed to defy the laws of physics, Dr. Wecht has dubbed it the magic bullet.
It happily, readily, and magically accommodates you and fits in with any scenario that you choose to apply to it at a given moment in time.
Could advances in forensic science shed any new light on this controversy? In 1991, forensic experts at Failure Analysis Associates, an engineering firm, tested the single bullet hypothesis using crime scene reconstruction techniques not available in 1963. First, engineers took precise measurements of Dealey Plaza using a digital surveying system.
That shoots out a ranging piece of electromagnetic information and can tell you the distance from your transit to that point with about 1/100th of an inch accuracy.
Next, they took measurements of the president's limousine, built a plywood replica, placed 2 men inside, approximately the same height and weight as the president and governor, and digitally captured the images. As a reference, they used the positions of both men as shown in the Zapruder film. In digitizing the Zapruder film, frame by frame, the engineers at Failure Analysis made an important discovery.
We noticed in just one frame, Connally's lapel flips up and back. 60,000th of a second it's gone. And of course, one frame is too fast for the eye to catch by about a factor of 2. So no one had seen it before. But what that very fortuitous discovery gave us was exact timing of the bullet passing through his chest and this lapel.
As Governor Connally's lapel moves, he's turning to look at the president.
Because he had heard the first bullet discharge that had missed, and he turned around, and then the second one caught him, not as he was sitting bolt upright looking ahead, but as he was moving around to see the president.
As the president emerges from behind the highway sign, it is clearly visible that he's been hit, just an 1/18th of a second later. The animation shows that President Kennedy was sitting higher than Governor Connally, who was on a jump seat below and slightly to the left of the president. This red line represents the path a bullet would take from the 6th floor of the school book depository. If the president was leaning slightly forward at the time of the shooting, and Governor Connally is positioned as he was at the moment his lapel moved, the bullet trajectory into the president's back, through his throat, and into Governor Connally's back is a straight line.
If the governor is turning to look at the president, the bullet goes through his back, out his right chest.
It would have changed direction only slightly after breaking Governor Connally's rib in order to go through his right wrist and into his thigh.
A connect the dot exercise, but the dots in this case are wounds. If you position those bodies correctly in the vehicle, and if you've got the geometry correct, then those wounds, if created by a single bullet, will line up.
Perhaps the most intriguing discovery is the wound to Governor Connally.
There's an oblong entry wound. I actually had Governor Connally in my office and said, "Governor, would you take your shirt off?" And he did, and you could see the scar. It's still there. It's an oblong scar.
The length of the wound was the same as a Mannlicher Carcano bullet, which meant it entered the governor's back sideways. Why did it enter sideways? Because the bullet was tumbling.
The bullet tumbles after it passes through John Kennedy, and this is a well-known phenomena of long bullets. The Carcano slug is actually quite long compared to its diameter. And after it goes through John Kennedy, it does begin to tumble as a result of the tissue impact that it had.
Forensic scientist Dr. John Latimer attempted to duplicate the tumbling bullet scenario. He fired Mannlicher Carcano bullets through an animal carcass used to simulate the muscle and flesh of a human neck.
As we started doing the experiments, I noticed fairly quickly that the bullet holes in Connally, in our Connally simulations, practically always represented a tumbling bullet.
The holes in Dr. Latimer's targets were oblong, just like Governor Connally's wound. But Dr. Wecht and other critics remain unconvinced. Dr. Wecht argues that a bullet doing all this damage would look very different from the bullet recovered from the stretcher in Parkland Hospital.
Commission Exhibit 399, the stretcher bullet. This bullet, which produced 7 wounds in 2 men, broke 2 bones in John Connally, and I mean significant fractures. This bullet, the magic bullet, shows no deformation.
The bullet was slightly flattened on the side, and there was lead coming out of the bottom. But the nose wasn't crushed, as one would expect. How was that possible? Dr. Latimer set up a second ballistic test to try to find out. He fired bullets through the animal carcass and parts of cadavers representing Governor Connally's rib, wrist, and femur. When the bullets tumbled, they hit the bone sideways.
So that it squeezed the soft gray lead out of the copper jacket, out of the rear of it, like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube.
And it left the nose of the bullet intact, similar to the so-called magic bullet. But none of this actually proved the single bullet theory, only that it was plausible. In 1978, a congressional committee asked chemist Dr. Vincent Gwynne to use neutron activation analysis to compare the so-called magic bullet to the bullet fragments in Governor Connally's wrist. Dr. Gwynne removed a tiny portion of the bullet's soft lead inner core and placed it in a nuclear reactor to make it radioactive. Then he used gamma spectroscopy to measure the gamma rays. Dr. Gwynne then tested the 2 bullet fragments from Governor Connally's wrist and compared those to the sample from the magic bullet.
The fragments from Governor Connally's wrist matched very closely with the pristine or magic bullet. He concluded that it was highly probable that these belonged to the same bullet.
Ballistic tests of the magic bullet show that its lands and grooves match Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano rifle found in the school book depository. Despite all the claims that one bullet couldn't have wounded both President Kennedy and Governor Connally, forensic tests proved that it did.
The autopsy on President Kennedy, the medical records on Governor Connally, and the ballistic evidence entirely consistent with a single bullet theory.
When we return, forensic science tries to answer a question that has haunted researchers for decades. Was there a second gunman firing at the president that day? Perhaps the most hotly debated issue surrounding the Kennedy assassination is the direction of the bullet that caused the president's fatal head wound. The Zapruder film clearly shows the president's head moving backwards at the moment of impact, as if the shot had come from in front of him. This has led to widespread speculation that there were two shooters firing at the president that day, not one.
There was one shooter in the rear, and there was one shooter behind the wooden stockade fence on the grassy knoll. And that accounts for many things, including the movement of John Kennedy's body when he is struck in the head.
The theory that a second shooter fired from behind this picket fence from the so-called grassy knoll in front of the president has endured for 40 years. Josiah Thompson, author and assassination researcher, was one of the first writers to suggest a grassy knoll shooter. As proof, Thompson cites two motorcycle policemen riding just behind the presidential limousine.
Hargis and Martin were both struck with impact debris from the shot which hit Kennedy in the head. Hargis was hit such a shot that immediately after the shooting, he dumped his cycle, turned to the knoll area, and ran up in this area. He did that because he thought a shot came from the right front.
Other witnesses reported the same thing.
You had Bill and Gail Newman, who were standing on the grassy knoll.
I thought the bullet was just going a few inches over the top of my head from directly behind.
I thought they were coming from behind us, which would be the concrete retaining wall area.
For me, though, the single best witness is a man named S.M. Holland, who's standing on an overpass.
Well, Skinny Holland was a crusty old railroad man. Holland saw some smoke make its way out from under some bushes along the stockade fence on the knoll.
Thinking it was gunfire, Holland said he ran over to the fence and saw fresh footprints and cigarette butts. The most powerful support for the second gunman theory comes from the Zapruder film and the backwards movement of the president's head.
If he struck from the rear, a bullet, 6.5 millimeter copper jacket striking him in the back of the head, going to drive him forward. Well, look at the Zapruder film. Frame by frame by frame by frame by frame by frame, he's going backward into his wife's right shoulder.
But what happens when this question is tested by ballistic analysis? Forensic investigator Dr. John Latimer tried duplicating the fatal headshot using human skulls filled with animal tissue and white paint to help photography catch the action.
You can see the impact of the bullet. You can see that the great blast of whitish brain substance goes out the front of the head, and that the head reacts to that by going backwards towards the gun. There were no occasions where some of the time it didn't work.
The experiment showed it was possible for a bullet fired from the rear to cause a backwards head movement. And crime scene reconstruction techniques and forensic animation show something else. This is the position of President Kennedy at the moment of the fatal head wound. To his right is the grassy knoll. As you can see, President Kennedy's head is parallel to the grassy knoll at the time the fatal shot was fired. The president's autopsy shows no wound from the side.
This particular bullet destroyed the right hemisphere, didn't destroy the left hemisphere. You see a bullet that coming in this direction. No bullet from this direction. There's no entry wound on this side of the skull.
In 1978, a panel of distinguished forensic pathologists studied the X-rays of Kennedy's head wound and concluded the same thing. Dr. Michael Bodden chaired that committee.
On the X-ray, there was a bullet that entered the upper back of the head. Little fragments broke off and streamed through the brain. The bullet itself exited and was recovered, which are entirely indicative that the shot was from back to front.
Neutron activation analysis confirmed that the bullet fragments in Kennedy's brain and the bullet fragments found on the floor of the limousine were all from the same bullet. No other fragments from any other bullets were found in the limousine or in the president's brain. But these forensic tests haven't silenced conspiracy theorists. Many still believe there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll, and they will only concede that he may have missed.
I am convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that there was a shot from the grassy knoll. That's the degree of confidence. And the shot from the grassy knoll does not hit the president. It misses him based on all the autopsy material.
As proof, Professor Blakey and others point to this. A Dallas police audio tape of radio transmissions recorded on the day of the assassination. Many believe it contains the sound of 4 gunshots, not 3, as the Warren Commission claimed. Could these scratchy sounds provide proof of a conspiracy? In the years since the assassination, rumors of conspiracy and cover-up have continued to grow, fueled by countless assassination books, websites, documentaries, and a Hollywood movie. The most powerful evidence pointing to a conspiracy was discovered in 1978 by a government committee investigating the assassination. It was a Dallas police radio transmission from a motorcycle microphone stuck in the on position. Many believed the motorcycle was in the presidential motorcade and had picked up sounds which were transmitted to police headquarters and recorded on a crude device called a dictaphone. The plastic belt had been in a drawer for 14 years and largely forgotten until the 1978 committee convened.
Immediately we wondered if that was at the same time of the assassination, and that's when we had it analyzed.
Could this recording hold clues about what really happened in Dealey Plaza that day? For answers, the government committee asked Dr. James Barger, chief scientist at Bolt, Beranek and Newman, one of the nation's leading acoustics firms, to analyze the tape. The recording didn't have any distinct sounds of gunfire, only clicks and pops, which posed an immediate problem for investigators.
You had the impression that there was a motorcycle very near to the microphone. You could hear crowd sounds, cheering the president, and all sorts of noise and static, dominated by the motorcycle.
After filtering out much of the noise, Barger found several large spikes, followed by smaller spikes on the waveform that resembled gunfire and echoes. To see if they really were gunshots, he proposed an elaborate series of forensic ballistic tests.
And I said, well, that's fine, Jim. What do you want to do? And he says, I want to shoot a gun in Dealey Plaza. And I thought, oh, my God, he wants to go down to Dealey Plaza and shoot guns. Needless to say, that'd be a media circus.
But they did it anyway. Engineers set up 36 microphones in Dealey Plaza along the motorcade route, then fired test shots from both the school book depository and the grassy knoll. When those test shots were compared to the sounds on the audio tape, scientists found what they believed to be 4 gunshots, 3 from the school book depository, 1 from the grassy knoll. To make absolutely certain, a second set of scientists reviewed Barger's analysis.
It appears that with a probability of 95% or better, there was indeed a shot fired from the grassy knoll.
It was the first hard forensic evidence of a conspiracy. Here's Mr. Zapruder's film placed in sync with what scientists believed were the 4 gunshots on the motorcycle tape. We've added a sound to denote the shots.
I was quite struck by how well they matched.
And if you don't believe the tape or the film, this is an enormous coincidence. And that's two shots match beautifully, about 6 seconds between them. And then you can fit the other shots in with other events that you can see on the film.
In 1978, a government committee concluded that there was most likely a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy. Conclusions based in part on this audio tape. These scientific findings stirred immediate controversy. The first significant challenge came from an unlikely source. Steve Barber is an audiophile and an amateur JFK assassination researcher. When an article about the assassination appeared in a magazine in July of 1979, he naturally bought it. Inside was a cheap vinyl recording of the Dallas police motorcycle tape. After playing the record over and over, Barber heard someone speaking at the same time as the alleged gunshots.
I really couldn't make out the rest of it, you know, and then I thought, oh, I'm not going to figure this out. Well, then I was listening one more time, and I thought, wait a minute, I've heard this. Where else have I heard this?
Barber then realized he had heard this message before in another recording. It was the voice of the Dallas County Sheriff, Bill Decker, telling his men to cordon off the area around the school book depository. But police records showed that Decker actually made this statement about a minute after the assassination.
What I hear is solid evidence that there cannot be any gunshots, and it was something that was said over a minute after the president had already been killed.
Did an amateur's revelation mean that the government scientists were wrong? Barber took his suspicions to the National Academy of Sciences, where another study of the tape was taking place. Those scientists confirmed Steve Barber's findings and concluded that the sounds on the tape were just noise. But in 2001, a study in a respected British forensic journal found the opposite, that the sounds were indeed 4 gunshots. So what's actually on this tape? To find out, Forensic Files commissioned its own forensic audio analysis of the recording. In a moment, you'll see the test and learn its surprising results. For years, this recording of a Dallas police radio transmission has been shrouded in mystery and controversy. Some scientific studies say it proves the existence of a second assassin, while others say it's nothing but noise. In an attempt to shed new light on the Dallas tape, Forensic Files commissioned its own test using the most sophisticated technology available. Bob Berkovitz, the retired chairman of Sensometrics, a Boston, Massachusetts audio research firm and a respected forensic audio expert, performed the study.
If we're going to find out what happened in 1963, it will be by continuing application of the scientific method to what data we have.
Applying that method, Berkovitz began his 6-month investigation by reviewing all of the earlier acoustic studies and their conclusions. Berkovitz used the same copy studied by the National Academy of Sciences 20 years ago, a copy that hadn't been touched since.
First, I located the places that were said to be gunshots. The sound waves were further examined using several programs. One that simply displays the sound wave pattern in great detail. Another software that we've developed mainly for speech study that displays spectrograms.
Almost immediately, Berkovits found a problem.
When we look at these shots, they're very different from each other. This is shot number 1, for example. This is shot number 2. Now we'll go to shot number 3. Look nothing like each other. So that if one of them looked like a gunshot, we would have to conclude the other two didn't.
Next, he performed a spectrographic analysis of what were assumed to be the engine sounds of the motorcycle moving along the motorcade, and he noticed something peculiar.
What you see on the screen going from left to right is a wide gray band, and that represents the noise. Within this band are 2 darker stripes that stay in the same place from left to right throughout the noise. This shows that the noise isn't changing in any significant way during this time, and you'd expect the noise to change if it were made by a motorcycle that was moving.
So Berkovits concluded that the motorcycle wasn't even in the presidential motorcade. Finally, Berkovits tackled the most important question of all. Are these gunshots on the motorcycle tape? This is the acoustic fingerprint of a grassy knoll gunshot, the result of calculations made by government scientists in 1978. This is the muzzle blast, followed by echoes. This is the waveform of what's recorded on the motorcycle tape. When government scientists compared these two, they found 14 possible echoes on the motorcycle tape. 10 matched the echoes on the grassy knoll fingerprint. 10 echoes matching out of 14 was a pretty high percentage, and explains why government scientists concluded the sound on the motorcycle tape was a grassy knoll gunshot. Berkovits decided to do the same comparison, only this time he did it a bit differently.
If we use the procedure described by the original investigators of printing out a picture of the waveform on a long roll of paper and then measuring it visually and deciding which impulses to include and which not and which to count, there might be a chance of human error.
Berkovits designed a computer program to compare these two waveforms, eliminating both human error and the possibility of subjectivity.
The computer program looks one by one for each of the echoes that are said to have occurred after the gunshot was fired to see if there is an impulse that matches within 1,000th of a second.
The computer also took into account such variables as the speed of the dictabelt recording. The computer identified twice the number of possible echoes on the motorcycle tape, and only 5 of those matched the acoustic fingerprint. With 5 matches out of a possible 25, Berkovits says it's highly unlikely this is a gunshot.
We were unable to find any evidence that, in fact, there's a gunshot in the recording.
Berkovits then increased the latitude by which the computer calculates a match by lowering the level of what could be considered an echo and adjusting the estimated speed of the motorcycle tape. Even this didn't improve the odds of a gunshot. Then Berkovits asked a more basic question. If the sounds weren't gunshots, what were they? First, he had the computer generate random noise. Then, he selected 3 different portions of the random noise and compared them to the acoustic fingerprint.
I found that the numbers were not that different, and in some cases were better than the correlation and probabilities obtained with the police recording. Therefore, the impulses can't be the gunfire of assassins.
And Berkowitz's tests also confirmed what Steve Barber found years earlier, that the sheriff's message, "Hold everything secure," was recorded on the motorcycle channel at the time the sheriff said it, not by any other means or methods. Scientific proof that the audio tape, argued about and studied by numerous government panels and independent researchers for 25 years, wasn't even recorded at the time of the assassination.
I hope that what we've done and talked about today will bring us a little closer to the truth, and it too is open for criticism and discussion, which is as it should be.
Questions answered and questions that remain when the JFK assassination investigation reopened returns. The echoes of gunfire that day in Dealey Plaza have resonated through every town, large and small, in the 40 years since the assassination. The question everyone asks, did Lee Harvey Oswald murder John F. Kennedy, and did he do it alone? We may never know everything about the assassination, but there are some things we can say with certainty. If there was an elusive grassy knoll shooter, he not only missed his target, but left not one shred of scientific evidence behind. Over the past 40 years, numerous forensic investigations, including this one, have concluded the Warren Commission was correct. Oswald acted alone. But the search for answers will inevitably continue.
I don't know what happened. I've studied this for the last 40 years, and I don't know what happened.
What happened to President Kennedy was not a conspiracy of bad people trying to hide whoever really killed the president, but a conspiracy of ignorant people who didn't know how to properly do an autopsy and to provide information to the investigators.
It is a scandal of the first order that the President of the United States, when he was assassinated, did not get the same forensic autopsy that you or I would get if we were shot in any major city.
I think belief in conspiracy is just another way of articulating uncertainty. There's something dark out there. I don't know what it is, but it must be something. But most people just weren't prepared to accept this really dreadful thought that this schnook, this nobody, could climb up some stairs and kill John F. Kennedy. That was hard to believe.